The desert sun blazed down on the front gate of FOB Titan. To most soldiers, it was just another routine day, and the young staff sergeant at the checkpoint seemed invisible. A rookie stuck on the most thankless duty. But then everything shifted. A black SUV rolled to a halt, and out stepped a Navy SEAL commander, a man whose reputation was legendary across the military. Protocol said she should salute first. Instead, in full view of the base, he stopped, turned, and saluted her. Silence fell. Officers froze. Every soldier stared in disbelief. Why would one of the most respected warriors in the world honor a simple gate guard before anyone else? The sun in Afghanistan is merciless. It does not simply shine, it punishes. Every day at Forward Operating Base Titan, the heat pressed down on the concrete barriers and dusty gravel roads like a hammer. The shimmer of heat waves made the horizon blur, and the air itself felt heavy, as though the desert wanted to crush the life out of anyone foolish enough to stand still beneath it. And at the gate, posted hour after hour, stood Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez. To most soldiers, she was just another guard at a forgotten checkpoint. Her post was seen as the bottom rung, the place you sent rookies or those who had no clear purpose. The officers barely glanced at her as they passed through. Some offered a lazy wave. Most gave nothing at all. She was there, in uniform, checking IDs with precision, yet in their eyes she was invisible. Furniture in camouflage. Every morning followed the same rhythm. Elena would step into her position at Entry Control Point Alpha, weapons slung and logbook ready. She scanned badges, compared faces, and raised the red and white barrier for convoys and patrols. The dust kicked up by Humvees coated her uniform, yet somehow her boots remained polished to a shine that defied the desert. She drank little water, spoke even less, and endured the silence of being ignored. In the dining facility, it was the same. She sat alone at the corner table, her tray balanced neatly, her posture upright, as if even the act of eating demanded discipline. Around her, clusters of soldiers swapped stories, laughed about patrol mishaps, and argued about sports. She was within arm's reach, yet never invited. No one asked her name. No one asked her story. It was easier to dismiss her as temporary, unimportant, just filling a slot until command found somewhere else to put her. But there were details, small, almost invisible to those who didn't care to look. Elena caught things others missed. A forged ID card slipped into the rotation. She caught it before the soldier made it through the gate. A vehicle pulling up slightly out of alignment, trying to mask its plates. She logged it with a sharp note in her report. Her rifle, always carried correctly, always at the low-ready position, never swinging loose like those who grew lazy under the monotony. Even her boots, polished, dust wiped away whenever she had a spare moment, were a quiet statement. She wasn't sloppy even when the world around her thought the post didn't matter. To those who passed by, her silence was proof she was inexperienced, maybe even scared. They thought she was still adjusting to military life, still learning discipline. They didn't realize silence was a choice. Silence gave her time to watch, to measure, to notice the flow of life around the gate. Where others saw boredom, she saw patterns. Which supply trucks arrived late, which officers avoided eye contact, which units passed through without the proper clearances but were waved along anyway. She didn't write it down, didn't gossip about it. She simply kept it all in her head, like puzzle pieces waiting for the moment they would fit. It was perhaps her greatest strength and her greatest curse, to be dismissed by everyone around her, even as she was quietly doing her job better than anyone else. Day after day, she endured the same cycle. Heat, dust, silence, indifference. And in those long hours, Elena became something more than a guard. She became the unseen pulse of the gate, the steady rhythm of discipline in a place where no one thought discipline mattered. The irony was brutal. In the Army, respect is supposed to be earned, but what no one admitted is that sometimes respect is withheld for reasons that have nothing to do with performance. Rank, popularity, connections, gossip. Elena had none of those advantages. She had only her skill, her discipline, and her silence. And yet, doesn't that sound familiar? Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever been in Elena's position? Have you ever sat in a meeting where your ideas were ignored, only to watch someone else repeat them later and get the credit? Have you ever done a job so well that no one noticed because they assumed it didn't matter? Have you ever been invisible in your own workplace, in your own community, in your own family? It's painful, isn't it? That sense of being overlooked, as though the effort you pour into every detail vanishes the moment you step aside. It wears on you. It makes you wonder if you should stop caring, if you should let the details slide, if you should let yourself blend into the gray blur of just another person at the gate. But Elena didn't. She refused. Even when no one was watching, she saluted with precision. Even when no one cared, she checked every ID as if the safety of the entire base depended on it. Even when her only audience was the scorching sun and the dust curling up from the road, she stood tall. That's the paradox of invisibility. You can be unseen, ignored, dismissed. But if you keep showing up with discipline, if you keep holding yourself to a higher standard, the world eventually notices. Maybe not right away. Maybe not when you expect it. But sooner or later, someone sees. And at FOB Titan, it was only a matter of time before the silence broke, before the routine shattered, before one unexpected gesture would flip the entire base's perception of the invisible gate guard. The day began like any other at FOB Titan. The desert sun had already claimed the sky, scorching the gravel roads and glaring off the armored vehicles that rumbled through the gates. Soldiers moved about their routines, convoys preparing for patrols, officers hurrying from one briefing to another, contractors hauling supplies. To them, it was nothing but another day in the endless cycle of deployment. And at the gate, Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez stood steady, her posture perfect, her eyes sharp beneath the brim of her helmet. She had been invisible for weeks, just another checkpoint guard, logging vehicles, examining IDs, raising and lowering the barrier. But fate has a strange way of breaking monotony. On that particular afternoon, a sound unlike the usual echoed on the gravel, a low, heavy rumble. It was the tires of a black SUV, not the standard tan Humvee, not the white contractor pickup trucks, not the armored convoys that usually moved in groups. This was different. Sleek, tinted windows, government plates, its very presence radiating authority. No radio message had announced its approach. No log entry had predicted its arrival. The SUV simply appeared, rolling up to the gate as though it owned the road. Elena felt her muscles tighten. She shifted her rifle into low-ready position, the stance drilled into her 1,000 times. Her eyes locked on the driver's side as the vehicle rolled closer. Around her, the atmosphere began to shift. The chatter of nearby soldiers died down. Even the humming generators seemed to fade as eyes turned toward the unexpected intruder. The SUV came to a slow, deliberate halt directly in front of her checkpoint. Dust swirled around the tires, shimmering in the oppressive sunlight. The driver's window slid down, revealing a stern-faced Army captain in subdued Special Operations insignia. He handed over credentials with a quiet confidence, as if certain no one would dare question him. Elena scanned them, her expression as professional as ever, but her senses heightened. Something about this felt different. Then the rear door opened. Time seemed to bend in that moment. The sound of the latch, the creak of the heavy door, it all played in slow motion. And from the shadows inside stepped a man whose presence alone shifted the air around him. Commander Jonathan Hawk Mercer. Stories about him had traveled across every campfire, every barracks, every whispered corner of the military. A Navy SEAL whose operations were spoken of only in fragments, a man credited with saving lives in situations too classified to ever reach the newspapers. To most, he was a legend. To the few who had served alongside him, he was a force of nature. He emerged from the SUV with a deliberate calm, his dark dress uniform immaculate, despite the harsh desert environment. The weight of metals on his chest reflected flashes of sunlight. His movements were not rushed, not hesitant. They carried the authority of someone who had nothing left to prove. Every soldier nearby froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even officers stopped in their tracks. It was not every day a SEAL commander, let alone this SEAL commander, walked through the front gate of FOB Titan. Protocol was clear. Ramirez should salute first. She should snap to attention, raise her hand to her brow, and offer the deference owed to an officer of his stature. That was the way of the military. Rank demanded it. Tradition required it. Everyone expected it. But then the impossible happened. Commander Mercer stopped walking. He turned, his boots grinding against the gravel, and locked eyes with Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez. His gaze carried recognition, not the distant acknowledgement of an officer toward a nameless guard, but the piercing look of a warrior toward another warrior. And then he raised his hand. The salute was sharp, precise, and without hesitation. Jonathan Hawk Mercer, legendary commander, decorated SEAL, symbol of power and authority, saluted first. The base fell into absolute silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Soldiers who had been mid-step froze, their boots suspended above the ground. Officers who had been checking their watches let their arms fall. Every pair of eyes locked on the scene before them, and disbelief rippled like an electric current through the crowd. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip of protocol. The gesture was intentional, deliberate, filled with weight far beyond military custom. It was respect. Not the shallow respect given out of rank or obligation, but the kind of respect earned in shadows, forged in blood, carved out of moments few would ever understand. Elena responded as she always did, with discipline. She returned the salute with equal precision, her arm snapping to her brow, with a crispness that carried both humility and pride. Yet this time, the context transformed the act. The invisible gate guard had just been publicly honored by one of the most respected warriors alive, and everyone saw it. The soldiers who had ignored her now stared with wide eyes. The officers who had dismissed her as just another rookie felt the sting of their arrogance. The air was heavy with unspoken questions. Who was she? What had she done to earn this? Why would Mercer, of all people, salute her first? The moment stretched longer than anyone expected, a silence not born of awkwardness, but of awe. The kind of silence that told every soul present they were witnessing something that would be retold again and again, long after this deployment ended. Finally, Mercer nodded once, just a small tilt of his head, but filled with meaning. Then, without a word, he lowered his hand and walked past, his stride as steady as ever. The SUV door closed behind him, and the world slowly exhaled. Conversations erupted again, but now in whispers. Soldiers leaned toward each other, trading theories. Some swore Ramirez must have saved his life on a mission. Others insisted she was part of a classified unit no one had clearance to know about. The truth was hidden, but the moment was undeniable. At the checkpoint, Elena Ramirez returned to her duty as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She checked IDs, logged vehicles, raised and lowered the barrier. But everyone who passed through from that moment on looked at her differently. The invisible guard was invisible no longer. And though no one yet understood why, the legend of the salute had already begun to spread across FOB Titan. Rumors travel fast in any military installation. At FOB Titan, they spread faster than desert fire, whipped by the wind. Within an hour of Commander Jonathan Hawk Mercer saluting Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez, the story had already reached the furthest corners of the base. By evening, it was the only subject anyone cared to whisper about. Soldiers huddled over trays in the dining facility, reenacting the salute with wide eyes and hushed voices. Mechanics paused in the motor pool, grease still on their hands, speculating about what could possibly connect a Navy SEAL legend to a quiet staff sergeant guarding the gate. Even the officers in their secure briefing rooms couldn't help but steal glances at one another when her name surfaced. Everyone had questions, but no one had answers. Some insisted Ramirez must have saved Mercer's life on a mission. Others swore she had been part of some classified unit. Delta, SEALs, maybe even something higher. A few dismissed it as an act of chivalry, but deep down, even they knew that wasn't true. Mercer wasn't the type to hand out gestures of respect lightly. The base had seen many things before. Combat rotations, medal ceremonies, visiting generals. But this, a commander saluting a staff sergeant first, that was unheard of. And in the silence that had followed, the weight of it had sunk into everyone's bones. Soon, eyes turned toward the administrative offices. If anyone could solve the mystery, it would be the people with access to personnel files. First Sergeant Daniel Johnson was among the first to start digging. A career NCO with a nose for things that didn't add up, Johnson had been standing not far from the gate when Mercer's salute took place. The moment unsettled him enough to act. That night, he logged into the secure personnel system, typing in Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez. What he found only deepened the mystery. Her file looked ordinary at first glance. Too ordinary. Standard training records, assignments to generic infantry units, deployments listed only by region, never by operation. No awards beyond the usual service medals. No disciplinary actions, no commendations beyond the generic. It was the kind of file that should have described a soldier who had coasted through her career unnoticed. And yet, the more Johnson read, the more inconsistencies he spotted. Gaps where dates didn't line up. Assignments that were coded only by numerical designations, 327519, without explanations of unit purpose. Training schools listed with vague acronyms no one on base seemed to recognize. And then there was the clearance level, top secret, SCI. For a staff sergeant assigned to gate duty, that alone was a red flag. Soldiers with that clearance didn't just end up on punishment detail. Johnson rubbed his forehead unsettled. He knew enough about military bureaucracy to recognize when a file had been deliberately sanitized. It wasn't sloppiness. It was concealment. Someone, somewhere, had scrubbed Elena Ramirez's record clean, leaving behind only the dullest fragments of truth. The next morning, Johnson brought his concerns to Colonel Hayes, the base commander. Hayes was a sharp officer, not easily swayed by gossip, but even she had noticed the ripple Mercer's salute had created. In the privacy of the secure conference room, Johnson laid out what he had found. "Her file doesn't add up, ma'am," he said firmly. "It looks too clean. And if Commander Mercer knows her well enough to salute first, there's more here than we're being told." Hayes leaned back in her chair, considering. She tapped her pen against the table. "Run it higher," she said at last. "Discreetly. Don't put anything in writing you don't have to." With her approval, the inquiry went deeper. Through back channels, through contacts with higher clearances, fragments began to surface. Enough to sketch the outline of the truth, even if the details remained sealed behind layers of classification. Yes, Elena Ramirez had served under JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. 18 months, though the specifics of her missions were redacted. A note buried in an encrypted database mentioned Operation Neptune Trident, a mission that never appeared in any official history, but which insiders whispered had prevented a catastrophic attack on American soil. There were commendations, too, buried so deep only those with presidential authorization could read them. Commendations that spoke of calm under fire, of decisions that saved entire teams, of sacrifices no one would ever hear about publicly. The truth was undeniable. Ramirez wasn't at the gate because she was forgotten or punished. She was there because someone, somewhere, wanted her in plain sight but overlooked. The checkpoint was her cover. Her true mission wasn't to wave vehicles through. It was to watch, to listen, to monitor. Counterintelligence. The gate was the perfect vantage point. Every soldier, every officer, every contractor passed through her post. Their credentials, their vehicles, their schedules, all of it flowed past her eyes. And while she logged the routine details, she was also tracking the patterns no one else noticed. Which units moved at odd hours? Which officers used unfamiliar credentials? Which convoys came and went without authorization? Her presence at the gate wasn't an accident. It was strategy. By the end of the week, the whispers had transformed into certainty. No one could say exactly what Ramirez had done, but everyone knew she wasn't just a rookie. She wasn't invisible anymore. Soldiers who once ignored her now straightened when they walked past. Officers who had dismissed her now offered nods of respect. And yet, through it all, Elena remained unchanged. She checked IDs with the same steady hand. She kept her boots polished, her salutes sharp, her voice calm. She never confirmed the rumors, never denied them. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. The salute from Mercer had torn down the curtain of invisibility. The investigation had shown glimpses of the truth, but the full picture of who she was and what she had done remained hidden, locked away in classified vaults, protected by walls of secrecy. Still, one fact was undeniable to everyone at FOB Titan. The woman at the gate was no longer just a gate guard. She was something far greater. Change in the military rarely happens overnight. Rules, traditions, and egos are hard to move. But sometimes a single moment cracks the surface so deeply that the entire culture begins to shift. At FOB Titan, that moment had been Commander Mercer's salute, and from that day forward, nothing at the gate was ever the same again. At first it was subtle. Soldiers who used to stroll past Staff Sergeant Elena Ramirez without so much as a nod began adjusting their posture when they reached the checkpoint. Helmets were buckled, uniforms tightened, salutes sharper. They didn't dare offer her the lazy half-acknowledgement they'd once given. Whether they admitted it or not, they carried the weight of Mercer's gesture in their minds. If a legendary SEAL commander recognized her, then so should they. Within a week, the dining facility looked different too. The corner table where Ramirez had once eaten alone was no longer empty. Young privates, uncertain but curious, began asking if they could sit nearby. Non-commissioned officers nodded in her direction before taking their seats. The change wasn't loud or dramatic. No one dared bombard her with questions, but the silence that once isolated her had softened. Respect replaced dismissal. The biggest change came from the officers. Men who had smirked as they walked past her post now forced themselves to meet her gaze. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson, who had once muttered that she was just another rookie, found himself awkwardly pausing at the checkpoint, his salute suddenly more deliberate. He never apologized, but the hesitation in his eyes revealed that he knew. He had underestimated her, and the sting of his mistake lingered. And then came the new arrivals. Every few weeks, replacements rotated in. Fresh faces from the States, carrying the same casual, arrogant soldiers often bring to their first deployment. Normally, those posted to gate duty groaned at what they thought was punishment, but now they arrived at FOB Titan to whispers, "Don't laugh at the gate. That's Ramirez's post. That's where Mercer saluted first." Suddenly, what had been considered the lowest assignment on base became one of the most coveted. Soldiers requested rotations there, seeing it as an honor rather than a punishment. Even seasoned NCOs volunteered for shifts, eager to learn what Ramirez saw in the endless stream of vehicles and faces. The gate was no longer a forgotten corner. It had become the front line of trust and vigilance. And through it all, Elena remained unchanged. She did not bask in the attention, nor did she fuel the rumors. Her movements stayed steady, professional, unshaken by the shift in perception around her. She checked IDs with the same meticulous care. She logged every vehicle with the same precision. She polished her boots until they gleamed despite the dust. If anything, she seemed untouched by the cultural storm she had created. This, more than anything, earned her deeper respect. Many had expected her to seize the spotlight, to turn Mercer's salute into personal glory, but she didn't. She remained silent, unassuming, focused only on the task in front of her. That silence carried power. It told the others that she had nothing to prove, nothing to explain. The younger soldiers noticed. They began mimicking her habits, checking badges twice instead of once, keeping their rifles slung correctly, treating even the smallest tasks with gravity. To them, she became a quiet mentor, not through speeches or training sessions, but through example. Her discipline spread like a ripple across the base, reshaping how people approach their duties. Even commanders began rethinking the nature of minor assignments. Meetings in headquarters shifted tone. Gate duty was no longer spoken of as punishment. Instead, it was reframed as a position of trust, given only to those who had the steadiness to handle it. What once was a symbol of failure had become a badge of honor. FOB Titan itself felt different. Where soldiers had once trudged through their routines with grumbling and sarcasm, there was now a sharper edge of pride. The simple act of passing through the gate carried weight, a reminder that every role mattered, no matter how invisible it seemed. The salute had rewritten the culture of the base, teaching them a lesson they hadn't known they needed. That respect wasn't tied to rank, but to the quiet excellence of those who served without recognition. And Elena? She never spoke of it. Not once did she reference Mercer's salute. Not once did she hint at the classified past whispered about in barracks. She let others speculate, let others debate. Her silence was impenetrable, her professionalism untouchable. For some, that silence was frustrating. For others, it was awe-inspiring. But for everyone, it was unforgettable. The invisible staff sergeant at the gate had transformed not only how the base saw her, but how they saw themselves. And the legend was still growing. The orders came without warning. One morning, as the desert sun rose over FOB Titan, a courier arrived at the headquarters with a sealed envelope. Inside were Elena Ramirez's transfer papers. No explanation, no fanfare. Just a directive stamped with a classification so high that even Colonel Hayes could not read the details of her next assignment. By nightfall, Elena was gone. There was no farewell ceremony, no speeches, no lines of soldiers clapping her out of the base. She packed her gear quietly, signed the necessary documents, and disappeared into the same silence that had always defined her. A single convoy escorted her beyond the wire, and that was it. The staff sergeant who had once been invisible, then unforgettable, had vanished as if she had never been there at all, and yet her absence was louder than her presence had ever been. At the gate, soldiers still carried out their duties, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. No one dared treat the post as punishment anymore. The checkpoint had become sacred ground, where vigilance mattered, where discipline was respected, where even the smallest detail could protect the entire base. The shadow of Ramirez's example lingered in every polished boot, every crisp salute, every ID checked twice. But what remained most powerful was not the procedure. It was the story, the salute. Every soldier who had witnessed it retold it, sometimes with dramatic embellishment, but always with the same core truth. Commander Jonathan Hawk Mercer, the SEAL legend, had saluted a staff sergeant first. That image, the sharp hand raised, the stunned silence of the base, etched itself into the collective memory of FOB Titan. Soon the story spread beyond the wire. It moved with convoys to other bases, whispered during flights, passed between units over crackling radios and late-night coffee. By the time weeks had passed, the salute at Titan had become military folklore. Each retelling added weight, but the lesson remained crystal clear. Respect is not demanded by rank. It is earned in silence through service that others may never see. And that was Elena's true legacy. She had never asked for attention. She had never raised her voice to prove herself. She had stood at the gate day after day, enduring heat, dust, and dismissal, never faltering in her professionalism. She had done the work no one respected, until a single gesture revealed the truth that had always been there. For the younger soldiers, her story became a compass. Many had felt invisible in their own way, overlooked by superiors, underestimated by peers, dismissed because of rank or role. Elena became proof that invisibility did not mean insignificance, that the quiet posts, the thankless jobs, the unseen sacrifices were often the foundation upon which everything else depended. For the officers, her story was a mirror. Some had to wrestle with their own arrogance, realizing how quickly they had judged her without looking closer. It was uncomfortable, even humiliating, but necessary. The salute reminded them that leadership was not about demanding respect, but recognizing it where it was truly earned. And for the base as a whole, her story became a standard. From then on, gate duty was not given to the forgotten or the punished. It was entrusted to those who could uphold the weight of the post with vigilance and integrity. It was no longer a corner of dismissal. It was a place of honor. Elena Ramirez never returned to FOB Titan. Her path led into the classified shadows to missions and places her fellow soldiers would never know. But her legacy never left the base. Her silence had transformed into a roar, carried on the lips of every soldier who retold the story of the salute. And perhaps that is the greatest measure of respect. Not medals pinned in ceremonies, not headlines in newspapers, but the quiet knowledge that one's example reshaped the hearts and minds of others. The invisible staff sergeant had become a legend, and the lesson she left behind was simple, yet eternal. True respect does not come from rank or title. It comes from the silent, unwavering commitment to serve, even when no one is watching. Stories like the one you've just heard aren't really about a single salute or a single soldier. They're about what respect truly means. In today's America, many of us, whether in the workplace, in our families, or in our communities, know what it feels like to be overlooked. Maybe you've been the quiet worker who never gets recognized, the neighbor who helps behind the scenes, or even the grandparent who sacrifices for the family without expecting thanks. Elena Ramirez's story reminds us that true honor doesn't depend on titles, money, or recognition. It comes from the silent consistency of showing up, doing the work, and carrying ourselves with dignity, even when no one seems to notice. Think about how this applies to modern life. The janitor who keeps a school safe, the nurse pulling long shifts in a hospital, the retired veteran volunteering at a food bank, the single mother working 2 jobs to keep the lights on. These people may not stand in the spotlight, but without them, everything else would collapse. Just like the gate at FOB Titan, their posts may look ordinary, but in reality, they hold up the whole structure. And here's the thought I want to leave you with. If respect can be shown in silence, in a single gesture from one warrior to another, what would happen if we all started recognizing the invisible people in our daily lives? The cashier, the bus driver, the custodian. Wouldn't our society become stronger, kinder, more united? But I'll also leave you with a mystery. Why was Elena Ramirez really at that gate? How many quiet heroes are still out there, carrying secrets we'll never hear about, shaping history without recognition? Some questions remain unanswered, and maybe they're meant to. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible, only to be surprised by unexpected respect? Or do you know someone who deserves recognition but never receives it? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who could use a reminder of their worth. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Remember, the quietest service is often the most powerful. And here on Touching Stories, those voices will never be forgotten.